Stallone speaks out. Diddy and Clive Davis. Tied to scandal and explosive courtroom revelation. No one expected the courtroom to go silent. But when Hollywood legend Sylvester Stallone took the witness stand in the ongoing federal trial of music, mogul Sean Diddy Combs, the atmosphere shifted. What followed was not just testimony, it was a cultural shockwave. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. With that Stallone icon of action cinema, a man who had stood toe-to-toe with villains on screen, faced a very real fight. This wasn't Rocky. This was real life. And the truths he was about to share would rattle the foundation of the entertainment world. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Guan led the questioning. Measured and firm, she asked Mr. Stallone, "Have you had professional or social contact with Mr. Combs?" "Yes," Stallone replied. "Over the years. At events, after parties. We were never close, but our worlds collided more than you'd think." What began as a casual acquaintance turned into a damning recollection. Stallone recounted an event from 2010, a high-profile industry gathering hosted by Combs in Los Angeles. Celebrities, rising stars, producers, media, elites. Among them, Stallone observed a conversation that would come to haunt him. He was speaking to a young woman, Stallone began. She looked nervous. "I overheard him say, 'You'll do what I say, or you're done in this town. I made you, and I can break you.'" A hush fell across the courtroom as Stallone's words landed. The young woman resisted. She pushed back. "I didn't sign up for this," she said loud enough for others nearby to hear. There was tension, then laughter dismissal from Combs. At the time, Stallone said it seemed resolved. But now, in the light of new allegations, it felt different. It felt systemic. Guan leaned in. "What changed your view?" "Cassie's story," Stallone replied. "Wendy's story. I've got daughters." I looked back and I saw a pattern. I should have spoken up then. I'm doing it now. The courtroom wasn't just hearing a witness, it was witnessing a reckoning. Stallone's voice was steady, but heavy with remorse. The hero of 1,000 screen battles was fighting his own guilt publicly. And then came the moment that exploded headlines. There were others, he said. Bigger names. People who enabled this culture. The name that followed silenced the room. Clive Davis. Gasps, pens dropped. Spectators froze. Davis, a titan of the music industry mentor to icons architect of careers. Stallone described him as a guiding force, often seen closely mentoring Combs. He was always in control, Stallone noted. And Combs, he watched. He learned. At a 2012 Grammy party, Stallone observed Combs and a young Justin Bieber. He was just a kid, Stallone said. "I heard Combs tell him, 'Stick with me and Clive. We'll show you how it's done.'" The implication hung in the air. A coded lesson in power dynamics cloaked as mentorship. Guan asked, "Did you ever hear rumors about Mr. Davis?" "Yes," Stallone said, "from producers, artists, about control manipulation, about using parties and influence to silence dissent. People said he knew what was going on and did nothing." The defense jumped in. Objection hearsay and speculation, Judge Carter composed and firm overruled. "Mr. Stallone, stick to what you observed or heard firsthand." The tension in the room was palpable. And Stallone continued this time, naming another figure. Beyonce. "She was there," he said, "at those events. Early 2000s New York. I know a freak-off happened that night. I didn't see her in that room, but I saw her outside, dancing, smiling. The others came out shaken. She saw. She stayed silent." The courtroom erupted. Attorneys murmured. Jurors leaned forward. It wasn't just about what people did, it was about who didn't speak up. Was silence complicity? That was the unspoken question hanging in the air. Reynolds, the defense attorney, stood and pressed Stallone. "You're naming people who aren't on trial. You didn't see Beyonce or Davis do anything illegal. Isn't that right?" Stallone didn't flinch. That's right. But I saw the culture. I saw them there. I heard the whispers. And I know what happens when power goes unchecked. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was a map pointing to a system. And as the judge called a recess, the courtroom remained frozen in the weight of Stallone's words. Outside, the media swarmed. Reporters fired off headlines. Stallone drops bombshell. Diddy trial explodes. Clive and Beyonce named. But inside the courtroom, one thing was clear. The case against Sean Combs was no longer about one man. It was about an industry. And Sylvester Stallone had just cracked it wide open. As the courtroom doors closed behind Sylvester Stallone, the shockwaves of his testimony had already breached the courthouse walls. Media vans doubled outside. Commentators went live. The public watched with jaws clenched, hearts pounding. What had begun as a case against one man now cast shadows across an entire industry. The next morning, Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Guan reconvened with Stallone behind closed doors. Her tone was quiet, her questions precise. "Mr. Stallone," she began, "if we're to follow this further, we'll need names, dates, anything concrete that connects these individuals to a larger pattern. I'll give you everything I've got." Stallone answered, "This goes deeper than just Diddy. It's a system built on silence and fear." The narrative had shifted. It was no longer about isolated incidents. It was about a network, a legacy. A hidden blueprint passed from mentor to protege. And Stallone, once an outsider to the whispers, was now the voice dragging them into the light. At the heart of this network stood Clive Davis. According to Stallone, Davis's presence at key events was not coincidental, it was calculated. He wasn't just watching, he was guiding. At one party, Davis was overheard inviting a young artist to stay after for a private meeting. The tone wasn't warm, it was strategic. The way he said it, Stallone recalled, it felt like something unspoken was expected. Combs, standing nearby, took notes. Not on paper, but in posture. In silence. In the quiet mimicry of someone learning the rules of control. Meanwhile, rumors about Davis were surfacing, fueled by those who had long whispered behind the scenes. Allegations of psychological manipulation, of using access opportunity, and even substances to break resistance and mold obedience. But, for the courtroom, rumors weren't enough. And that's where Guan pivoted. "Mr. Stallone," she said, "what you observed directly, what you heard with your own ears, is what will carry this forward." Stallone nodded, and then he recounted a specific moment. It was 2012. Another industry party, this one more private. Justin Bieber had just turned 18. He was there with Combs. Davis, too. Stallone saw them together, heard the exchange. "Stick with me," and Clive Combs told Bieber. "We'll show you how it's done." At the time, it sounded like mentorship. In retrospect, it sounded like indoctrination. Stallone's voice shook slightly as he relived the memory. "Knowing what I know now, that moment hits different." The courtroom took a collective breath. And then came Beyonce's name, once again hanging in the air like a cord, unresolved. She wasn't in the room, Stallone clarified, but she was present. She had the power to ask questions, to say something. She didn't. This wasn't an accusation. It was a challenge to complicity, to silence, to fame that sees but doesn't speak. Defense attorney Reynolds seized the moment. "You're indicting by association," he argued. "You're asking us to condemn people for not speaking up, based on what their presence." "I'm saying," Stallone responded, "when you're a star, silence is a choice. And sometimes silence screams louder than words." His voice cracked. For a moment, the courtroom was no longer a place of law, but a stage for reckoning. Outside, the story had already spiraled. News segments dissected every sentence. Headlines bled urgency. Did Beyonce know Clive Davis under fire? Hollywood's code of silence. Social media too exploded. Some defended the stars named. Others demanded accountability. Hashtags trended. Threads unraveled years of red carpet footage, interviews, lyrics re-examined under a new, unforgiving lens. Back inside, Judge Carter addressed the court. Her tone was neutral, but the weight behind her words was clear. This trial is not about hearsay. It is about testimony, evidence, facts. But the patterns emerging are part of a wider inquiry, and this court acknowledges their relevance. The prosecution now had a task: follow the threads without losing the case. Stallone's testimony was not an endpoint, it was a beginning to a story far more complex than a single defendant. A system where mentorship may have masked manipulation, where silence bought safety, and where the victims for too long were left unheard. As the court recessed for the day, one thing became evident. This wasn't just the trial of Sean Combs. This was a mirror held up to power. And finally, someone had dared to look. Day 3 of testimony resumed under a cloud heavier than any legal charge, cultural reckoning. The court had become more than a place of prosecution. It was now a forum where decades of silence and complicity were being brought to light. What had once been whispers behind closed doors was now being recorded into the public record. Sylvester Stallone, again seated for additional questioning, had shifted from reluctant witness to resolute whistleblower. There was no hesitation in his tone, no theatrics in his presence. Just weight. And history. Mr. Stallone, Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Guan asked, "Besides Mr. Davis and Mr. Combs, are there other individuals you believe knowingly enabled this environment?" He paused. "Yes, Beyoncé." A collective inhale. The courtroom stiffened, not from surprise this time, but from the gravity of repeating the name. She was at those parties. I saw her more than once, Stallone explained. I never saw her involved in anything directly, but she was there. She saw the aftermath, the girls leaving those rooms, the looks on their faces. She looked away. Guan tread carefully. "Are you suggesting she played a role? I'm suggesting she had influence, and she didn't use it." That silence matters. The words weren't just about one person. They were about an entire structure, an ecosystem of fame, power, and protection. An industry that didn't just ignore victims, but normalized the discomfort as part of its cost of entry. The defense tried to pivot. Reynolds pushed again. "You're offering your interpretations. Nothing more. These people aren't on trial." Stallone answered exactly. And maybe that's the problem. His voice rose not with anger, but with decades of lived experience. "I've been in this industry 50 years. I've watched careers bloom and crash. I've seen what people give up to make it. I've seen what they're forced to do. I didn't speak up before. That was my mistake. But I see it now." The jury leaned forward. The emotional burden wasn't his alone. Everyone in the room felt the weight. Cassie Ventura, seated quietly in the gallery, wiped away tears. Across social media, the narrative was unraveling fast. Former industry insiders began to share stories. Anonymous tips flooded hotlines. Hashtags surged with phrases like "industry, reckoning, Osh break the code, voices unheard." Meanwhile, Stallone's credibility became a rallying point, not because he was a movie star, but because he admitted his own inaction. That honesty struck a chord. In a world where most deny, deflect, or disappear, Stallone chose to confront. Not just Diddy, not just Clive, but the entire silent architecture behind them. Judge Carter, maintaining order, addressed the court once more. This trial will not become a media circus. Testimony must be rooted in direct knowledge, not insinuation. However, systemic context is relevant to the racketeering charge. Proceed with caution. And so Guan did. She asked one final question that day. "Why now, Mr. Stallone?" His answer simple. "Because it's not too late to do the right thing, and because I believe there are more people ready to speak. But someone has to go first." As the session closed, no cross-examination followed. The defense had nothing further to ask for now. But in their silence, the tension only grew. Outside the courthouse, a sea of journalists flooded live broadcast. Stallone's name was trending globally. Public opinion split sharply. Some called him a hero. Others accused him of betrayal. But beyond the headlines, one truth had cemented silence once the rule had been broken. And that fracture was growing. As one reporter remarked during the evening news recap, this is no longer just about what happened behind closed doors. It's about who held the keys and why they kept them locked. By the fourth day, it was no longer a trial. It was a referendum. The name Sean Diddy Combs still headlined the indictment, but the list of unspoken names now loomed larger in public discourse than the one on the courtroom docket. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted more cautious, more alert, more personal. The prosecution pivoted its strategy. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Guan called no new witnesses that morning. Instead, she submitted audio exhibits and internal memos obtained from industry sources that hinted at a history of backroom arrangements, confidentiality contracts, and vague, unexplained consulting payments tied to unnamed guests at parties going back 2 decades. Nothing explicitly illegal on the surface, but in context they became signposts pointing to an environment built for coercion masked as celebration. Judge Carter reviewed each motion with meticulous attention. This court is not trying the entertainment industry, she clarified, but the pattern of power abuse alleged in this case must be understood within its operational context. And, in that moment, Stallone's words echoed louder than ever. Outside, a former tour manager anonymously confirmed aspects of his testimony. Inside, Guan continued drawing a through line between isolated moments and systemic operation. At the core was a chilling theme control. Whether through promises, threats, drugs, or dreams, it wasn't just what happened, it was how power was maintained. The courtroom played a recording from a deposition, an unnamed artist recounting her first and last industry event. You're either in or you're out. There's no middle. If you say no, you disappear. The gallery sat in silence, not because they were stunned, but because by now they weren't. Later that afternoon, Guan returned to Stallone's earlier mention of Justin Bieber. With careful wording, she described the mentorship dynamic, allegedly modeled after Clive Davis's approach. Early access trust built through admiration, loyalty bought with opportunity. She read aloud one of Combs's text messages to a then-teen artist. If you want this, you know who to listen to. The defense objected to relevance. Judge Carter allowed it, narrowly citing pattern and intent. Across the country, TV panels exploded with legal experts debating the fallout. But one sentiment repeated across all networks. This wasn't just about Combs's actions. It was about decades of systemic design. Then came a moment that hadn't been scripted. From the gallery, Cassie Ventura stood. Not scheduled, not planned. She asked to speak. Judge Carter deliberated briefly, then nodded. You may speak, but this is not formal testimony. Cassie stepped forward, her voice soft but resolute. I was 19 when I met him. I thought I had agency. I thought I had choice. But I didn't understand power back then. Not really. Power doesn't need to raise its voice. It just needs to make sure you don't have another option. Gasps, but she didn't cry. She didn't stammer. She simply looked at the jury and said, You're hearing all this and thinking, how could this happen? But the real question is, how could it have gone on this long? Judge Carter thanked her and dismissed the gallery for a recess. But the damage, or perhaps the truth, was already done. The narrative had shifted once more. Stallone had opened the door. Cassie walked through it. And now, for the first time, public attention stopped revolving around celebrity and started turning toward systems. Back in chambers, Guan met privately with her team. The plan was changing. Fast. We're not just trying to convict one man, she said. We're trying to expose a mechanism, and we've just been handed our clearest voice yet. The case had reached its tipping point. The defense could still argue technicalities. They could still object to hearsay. But what they couldn't do anymore, what no one could, was deny the shape of the shadow now hanging over the industry. By evening, media outlets no longer asked, will Diddy be convicted? They asked, who built this system? And more importantly, who's next? The final day of Stallone's public involvement was quieter in tone, but far louder in implication. The courtroom was tense, not from disruption, but from the weight of clarity. The fog of plausible deniability was gone. What remained was a chilling clarity. Sean Diddy Combs didn't operate in isolation. He thrived in an environment that incentivized silence, protected hierarchy, and punished dissent. Judge Carter began the morning session with firm control. We will now conclude the witness-based proceedings of this phase. The prosecution may proceed with final inquiries or clarifications. Guan nodded and stood. This wasn't a moment for fire. It was one for consolidation. Mr. Stallone, when you say the defendant learned this behavior, what do you mean? I mean, he didn't invent it, Stallone said. He inherited it. He paused, scanning the room. You look at how Clive Davis ran things, always composed, always smiling, but behind the scenes, power used like currency. People followed him because he made things happen. And Diddy. He watched, he absorbed, he became what the industry allowed. And what about the others? Guan asked. The ones who didn't participate, but didn't speak. They're part of it too, Stallone replied. Silence isn't neutral. When people who could stop something choose not to. That's a decision. Then came the final pivot. Mr. Stallone, Guan said carefully, what do you hope comes from your testimony? He didn't hesitate. I hope this industry starts protecting talent instead of exploiting it. I hope the people who saw what I saw speak up. I hope victims know they weren't alone. And I hope, if nothing else, we stop mistaking power for character. He glanced toward the gallery. Cassie Ventura nodded silently. Her face was calm, but her eyes told 1,000 stories. The courtroom sat still. Judge Carter dismissed Stallone with a brief nod of gratitude. You may step down. And just like that, the man once known as Rocky Rambo and 100 other fictional fighters walked out of the courtroom, not as a hero, not as a savior, but as a man who'd finally used his voice. But the story didn't end there. Later that day, the prosecution submitted a motion to expand the investigation into what it termed the network, a collection of alleged enablers, institutions, and influencers whose consistent proximity to the events described could warrant further inquiry. It wasn't a declaration of guilt. It was an invitation to transparency. Outside, the media swelled with renewed urgency. Interviews with former assistants, choreographers, makeup artists, all of whom began to say, yes, I saw something too. What once was a solo voice had become a chorus. Back on air, the lead story across all major networks wasn't just about the trial, it was about the culture it exposed. Editorial panels debated, how did the system survive so long? Who protected it? What happens next? Some entertainers issued statements. Some denied, others distanced. A few notably stayed quiet, and that silence now said more than any press release could. At sunset, Stallone reappeared briefly outside the courthouse. No cameras this time, just a handful of reporters and a single mic. One asked, "Do you think anything will really change?" Stallone looked up. "I don't know," he said. But now they can't say they didn't know. That was the final frame, the last word of his testimony, a line not meant to conclude, but to ignite. This wasn't just the end of a courtroom chapter. It was the beginning of something else, a reckoning, an awakening, and perhaps for the first time, a shot at real accountability.